afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Simperman. I'm the Executive Director of Global Cleveland. I'm very grateful to invite our incredible host of speakers who will be sharing incredible knowledge and truthful information with so many of you in law enforcement, in the legal field, in social work, in supporting so many members of our community. Global Cleveland is a nonprofit that was established 15 years ago for a very simple reason: to grow our international community here in Northeast Ohio. Over the last 3 years, the state of Ohio, Northeast Ohio, Cuyahoga County, and the city of Cleveland have seen that effect. For the first time in 4 decades, we have more people moving into our communities than native-born people have left or have passed away. So our state continues to grow, our economic development vitality continues to grow, and along with it grows our deep and abiding respect for law enforcement. So many of you are on the front lines. Please allow me to say a moment of personal privilege, how grateful we are to all of our police and our prosecutors and our lawyers who are helping ensure civil society and making sure that our community is safe and has what it needs. It is my pleasure now to introduce the person who will lead this conversation with our panel of experts, somebody who is known to many people. Her name is Elena Boop. Elena is the Chief Trial Counsel for the City of Cleveland. She brings extensive experience in litigation, public service, and knowledge of municipal law. She is a dedicated legal professional leading the city's trial division, one of the largest trial divisions in the state of Ohio, handling complex cases and advocating for justice on behalf of the city of Cleveland and her wonderful residents. With a strong commitment to legal excellence and public service, Elena plays a vital role in shaping the city's legal strategy and protecting the interests of our entire community. Miss Elena Boop.
Thank you for that introduction, Joe. It is my pleasure to moderate this very important and relevant discussion, and I'm honored to have such a distinguished panel with me today. Before we dive in, let me just briefly outline what you will hear today. First, we're going to hear from a local immigration attorney who is going to walk us through the UT visa process, and particularly how it involves the law enforcement community. Second, we will hear from the victim's perspective from an attorney who works with victims and serves as a victim's advocate. Next, our Cleveland Chief Prosecutor is going to talk about the role of law enforcement and the prosecutor's office in this process and the unique challenges and opportunities it presents. And finally, we will share with you the perspective of local law enforcement. You will hear from a Cleveland police detective, and he will share with you what we see on the ground, and also how the Cleveland Division of Police processes the requests for law enforcement certifications. So feel free to submit your questions in the chat, and I will try to weave them into our discussion or address them at the end of the presentation. So our first speaker is Patrick Espinosa. Pat is the managing partner of Sus Abogados Latinos. He is a dedicated advocate for immigrant communities and corporate clients nationwide. Born in Germany to Colombian parents, he has lived and worked across the US, Colombia, and China, gaining a global perspective that informs his legal practice. With a BBA in marketing and JD MBA from the University of Miami, Pat specializes in immigration, business law, and corporate consulting. He serves as president of the Ohio Hispanic Bar Association and holds leadership roles with Global Cleveland, the Northeast Ohio Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and the Cleveland Metro Bar Association. A mentor, Ohio resident, Pat is passionate about diversity, equity, and empowering underrepresented community. Pat, could you walk us through the basics of what UNT visas are and what the process of getting such a visa looks like?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Elena, and thank you, Joe. What a gracious introduction. I get kind of shy whenever whenever I hear that. So thank you. Yeah, I'll go through the technical aspects of it right now, and I won't get too much into detail on the nitty gritty of dealing with USCIS. So I'm going to share my screen now and kind of just take you through the basics. Give me 1 second. So the U, the T, and the S visas, these are for victims of crimes, victims of trafficking, and informant victims, or as they're colloquially called, snitch visas. So I'll just get right to it. For the U visa, which is the most common of these special classes of visas, they're for victims. And the victim or the person applying has to meet a certain criteria. They have to be the victim of a qualifying crime. Generally, any felony level crime will do. Domestic violence is usually the most common. Felonious assault, sexual assaults, kidnapping. This little list here is non-exhaustive. They had to have suffered substantial physical or mental abuse, have information about the crime, have helped law enforcement. The crime had to have violated U.S. law. And what's unfortunate is providing testimony or information isn't alone enough. We get a lot of clients in the door that do help significantly with the prosecution of certain criminals, but if they're not an actual victim, then they are not eligible. Some crimes that are kind of ride the fence on whether they'll be granted or not are victims of mental abuse. I recently had a client come in where there was no physical abuse in the relationship, but there was severe mental abuse, and the ex-husband actually was convicted of some murders. So in that case, the mental abuse would probably be enough. So one of the big things about the U visa is it has to be certified by a law enforcement agency. Detectives, high-level sergeants, lieutenants, prosecutors have to be contacted, and they have to sign off on it. And this is done on a USCIS form I-918 Supplement B. Generally, how we do it here in the office is we will make a packet for the law enforcement agency with all the evidence necessary for the person signing off to make that decision. And most of the time, we're in contact with them, and they usually know, but we don't like to leave anything out. So victim statements, their own police reports, and we'll show law enforcement exactly where they need to sign and what they need to do, and then provide an envelope to send it back. And this must be done 6 months prior to filing. So once the first step of certification is done, then we put the packet together. So the packet's going to include police report, court records, medical records, psychological evaluations, usually photos if there's injuries, affidavits, identifications, and the personal statement is very important. Usually we like to have a person do it in their own language. Sometimes it's difficult considering the sophistication level, so we don't want to create someone's story or put something false in, but we will kind of guide them to have them say what they were a victim of, how it affected them physically, emotionally, financially, how they help law enforcement, and why specifically they need protection in the United States. So once that's done, we put the petition together, usually a cover letter, the form 918, which is the petition for the visa, the certification, which is supplement B, evidence, and in some cases, what's called an I-192. It takes care of certain inadmissibility issues, such as entering undocumented, certain minor crimes. Usually that's filed with the whole packet. So there are no fees for these victims visas, for the U visa, and always make a copy and provide to law enforcement or prosecution or law enforcement agency, just in case USCIS has some questions, so they can refer back to them. These visas take a long time to process. Right now, it's 40 months. 6 months ago, it was taking over 6 years to process, and that changes depending on the staffing levels at USCIS. So once we turn in the packet, we'll get a receipt. The individual will be sent in for biometrics. Once they get the biometrics in, a bona fide determination will be made. And what happens is when USCIS receives this petition, they kind of page through it very quickly to see if it looks valid. There's so many people that turn in fraudulent petitions that this step is necessary for USCIS to determine if it is actually real. Once they make the bona fide determination, a letter will be sent, and that individual can apply for a work permit. And this started being done after June 2021. It also provides deferred action if that individual is in deportation proceedings. A motion to administratively close or to put on the status docket are generally granted with frequency in the case of a a receipt, just a receipt notice. They don't even need the bona fide determination. And there are 10,000 of these available a year. After 3 years, after the U visa is approved, after 3 years in that status, that individual can apply for their green card with USCIS. And pretty much all they have to show is that their evidence of continuous presence. Moving on to the S visa, which is the snitch visa, which is, they're actually pretty rare. I've never done one. I've only heard of one other person doing one, just because the numbers are pretty low, and we don't get clients that are, in organized crime or know about terrorist activities. So these visas are specifically for people that have information and are willing to assist as informants with either criminal organizations or terrorist activities. Only 900 have been issued since 1995. And generally, each individual law enforcement agency requests it on their own. However, attorneys can help, and usually you're going to see these at higher levels, at the FBI level, HSI, Customs and Border Protection. So I said they're pretty rare. So I'd assume if law enforcement agency came across some case like this, they would refer it up to the law director's attention. So the law enforcement agency must submit an I-854 interagency alien witness and informant record to USCIS. It's kind of the same petition, looks the same as a U visa, just include the details of the individual's cooperation, what's being investigated, what's the nature of the crimes, and why that person is necessary for the investigation. Each law enforcement agency must coordinate with Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice. Generally, there's attorneys assigned in each of those departments to help with these. And Department of Justice will usually provide an opinion letter. The individual must continue to assist the law enforcement or intelligence agencies to be eligible and abide by all the requirements that were placed upon them. Again, after it's approved, they can file for a green card in 3 years, and the sponsoring agency can provide a letter confirming cooperation. Now, a little bit more common than the S is the trafficking visa, and they have to be either a victim of sex trafficking or labor trafficking, both which are fairly common. And unfortunately, sometimes these are the ones where the victims don't really want to come forward. They're coerced into doing this stuff by fear, and they're often told beforehand that something bad will happen if they go to law enforcement. So to be eligible, they must be here physically present in the United States, have to show that their removal would induce extreme hardship, and you have to help law enforcement unless you are 18 or are unable to cooperate due to trauma, which happens in a lot of cases. A lot of the same evidence as the other two visas: police reports, court records, medical records, psychological evaluations, photos, affidavits. The personal statement also is very important. Certification from law enforcement agency is not required, but it is helpful. It's done on a Form 914 Supplement B and can be signed by police, prosecutors, or any federal agencies. Also must be filed within 6 months of filing of the 914, and they can file for a work permit once they file the 914. So processing time is about 20 months. There's 5,000 of these available a year. And again, like the other two visas, once it's approved, once they hit 3 years in that status, they can apply for a green card, and they can include their family members. So a couple other issues before I pass it off. I think everybody knows here a lot of undocumented immigrants are afraid to come forward. They see law enforcement in the same way they see immigration. They think they're going to be in trouble. They think that someone's going to turn them in. So this is going to be a major barrier for these immigrants. Also, language barriers. Many of our immigrant communities don't have easy access to translators, and if they do have access to translators, those translators also might be afraid to go to law enforcement. And the lack of knowledge. A lot of immigrants don't know about this at all unless they have a family member or friend that has gone through a similar process. So it's up to us to get this get the word out that these exist, and that they actually help bring people to justice, and they make our communities safer. So with that, I will pass it on back to Elena.
Thank you, Pat. I'm actually glad we have about 4 minutes left, and we actually had a very good question come up. The question is there a time limit for the length of time for someone that was a victim of a crime can contact law enforcement to qualify for a U visa?
So under the regulations, there is no time limit. I have done some that are over 10 years old. They're still in process, so I can't tell you if they're successful. If it's generally when it comes to U visas, the worse the crime, the stronger the case. Unfortunately, so in some situations where some guy was robbed, there was a one-page police report, from Los Angeles 20 years ago. I was like, just not enough there.
Yeah.
It's too light. But for example, an unreported rape, there's just we will go back pretty far. In some cases where the crime is a little bit more egregious and the trauma is a little more egregious. So when you're looking at these things, we also look at the trauma that was endured. And a lot of victims don't want to come forward. They don't want to relive what happened to them by having to speak to an attorney and then a detective and then maybe a prosecutor and then write a story about it and fill out these forms. So it's also traumatic for them to relive this in that stuff. So generally, as a rule of thumb, I'd say within several years is usually what we see. Obviously, if it's in several months of the crime being committed, it's a lot stronger. But the further back you go, the more heinous the crime has to be.
Pat, I have a follow-up question, actually a couple of follow-up questions on that. Just a point of clarification. You don't have to have a successful prosecution in order for the victim to qualify for that crime, for the U visa. Is that correct?
Nope, that is correct. Also in the regulations, there does not need to be a successful prosecution. It's
Okay.
the actual what the victim endured is the qualifying aspect of it.
So as an immigration attorney, you run into these petitions all the time. And so I imagine that you deal with different law enforcement agencies all the time. What do you think a law enforcement agency could do to help you as an immigration attorney represent your victims, your client victims?
So number one is provide easy access to the person that should be contacted at that specific law enforcement agency. Like Cleveland, we love you guys. You make it easy. Some other jurisdictions, it's kind of a hot potato, generally because sometimes, people in charge don't really know what this is. They don't understand it. So there's some educating to do from our end to some law enforcement agencies. But generally, education for those that make the decisions and have a point person that, we can directly go to instead of having to talk to everyone in the department to see who can sign off on a certification.
And then finally, for our last minute, can you share, I know you've shared some of the unique barriers, and are there any other unique barriers that you face in representing this very, very vulnerable population?
Yeah, one that's very difficult for any of us to overcome, and that's kind of the common knowledge among immigrant communities. I know that in the Hispanic community specifically, certain members will specifically tell maybe victims of a crime, don't go, you're going to get turned in, you're going to get deported. And they say this stuff, without education, without knowing really that person can go seek help and, actually get a visa. So a lot of the, internal rumors among the community itself kind of hinders our ability to reach and help victims of trafficking and violent crimes. Just trying to get past that. That community, where everybody talks to each other, and it's hard to break into that and hard to change some people's opinions. So.
Well, thank you so much, Pat. This was very informative. We actually have one more question, but I think that might be a good question for our prosecutor and our detective, so I'm going to hold off on it for now. Thank you so much, Pat. Our next speaker is Nate Johnson. He's a dedicated immigration attorney serving part-time with Sus Abogados Latinos and also full-time with Asian Services in Action. With a specialization in domestic relations and victim advocacy, Nate is a respected expert in Marcy's law, and he's committed to protecting and empowering individuals impacted by violence and injustice. Nate, why don't we start with telling us what Asian Services in Action does?
First of all, I want to say thank you for everybody for having me on here. It's a pleasure and an honor. So again, thank you. Asian Services in Action is focused on providing trauma-informed and holistic legal services. And what do I mean by that? So the attorneys here are multidisciplinary. So I do, for example, domestic relations, custody, DVCPOs, domestic violence civil protection orders. I also do immigration law, and I also do Marcy's law. And I'm not the only attorney here that does all three of those. And so I know how all three of those things interact with each other. So instead of a person needing an immigration attorney, a Marcy's law attorney, and a domestic relations attorney, and having to explain their story to three different people, three different times, and re-traumatizing them every single time, one attorney deals with that. And then you can ask Pat, this is quite literally how we met. You have people who are representing immigrants in, let's say, a domestic relations case, who are doing things that can get their clients deported because they don't understand how immigration works. And that's literally how Pat and I met. Not that Pat was doing it, we just had clients in common. And so that's really important. One aspect of it. And then the other aspect is the trauma informed is that all the attorneys here have trauma informed training, trauma informed experience, and have incredible extensive experience working with victims. And that's not even the best part about Asia. It's not even me. It's really not. What makes us so unique is all those things I just told you, but we have our own victim advocacy department that works with, prosecutor victim advocacy. It's not button heads. It works in conjunction with. And so why would that be necessary? Good question. You have someone who is a victim of domestic violence. Let's say it's their spouse, okay? And they are an immigrant here. They've been brought here on a fiance visa, adjusted, but they've never really worked. Husband or wife, whoever the abuser spouse is been paying for everything. They're saying, if you tell on me, I'm gonna get you deported, etc. They don't have any money. They don't have a bank account. They've been basically kept in the house. Unfortunately, this happens. So what we can do with that victim advocacy is I can get involved, one, say, we can do a DVCPO, we can file for divorce, I'll take care of your immigration. But they're not going to do anything if they don't know where they're going to stay tomorrow. They're not going to call the cops. They're not going to get a protection order. What our services do is we can provide, the victim advocates can provide material assistance, emotional assistance. They can provide help with job placement, empowerment. They can deal with these emergency situations where finding people housing, in emergency housing. Because if you don't know where you're going to stay that night, unfortunately, you might not call the police. You might not reach out to a lawyer. Because, we're talking about Maslow's hierarchies of needs. And if you can't fill that bottom one, shelter, food, you're gonna put up with it. So the other thing about the advocates is the advocates that we have are specifically from the communities that we serve. So they know the culture, they know the language, and they work right along with the attorneys. And it has created some of the most amazing, rewarding experiences of my life, not just my legal career, is working alongside the victim advocates that we have and doing this trauma-informed, holistic legal services.
Thank you for that. It really is wonderful to see this kind of a wraparound service that provide, kind of attends to all aspects of a victim's needs. I think that it's refreshing to see that. Can you said that you've had some really rewarding moments. So of course, the next question pops into my head is, could you share some success stories with us from your experience?
Sure. So I'll talk about Marcy's Law first. And for those of us who don't know what that is so I think it was 2018, there was a referendum and there was an amendment to the Constitution of the state of Ohio that added certain rights to victims. So they're in the Ohio Constitution. One of them is to have an attorney, okay, represent you. And so I had a case where a woman came to me. She only spoke Nepali. Okay. And so this guy, long story short, this guy was extorting her, guy from her community was extorting her. He had hit her with her car, actually. But when she called the police, there was a language issue, and not their fault. It was a language issue. And so she didn't really know if anything was going to happen. She came to me. Was able to use an interpreter from her community. I found out what happened. And so I ended up calling the detective and I said, "Hey, what's going to happen?" He's like, "Oh, I'm going to go to grand jury. I don't know." And I was like, "Well, here's what she told me." And what I was able to tell him was 10 times more than what he got. He literally told me that he didn't even know if there was going to be charges before I talked to him. And so it went from a guy possibly not getting charged, probably not getting charged, to him getting 4 years for attempted felonious assault and her getting restitution. That is the difference of Marcy's Law. And especially with the immigrant communities that don't understand. I mean, heck, no communities understand. We barely do. We just practice. But so it's so difficult for the immigrant communities that don't grow up here, that don't speak the language. And it's intimidating. It's intimidating for anybody to go through these processes. So when you have an attorney to do that with you from the very beginning, it's so important. And I always talk about that case because it went from almost nothing happening to prison time. If can I share another story?
Yes, we've got about 3 minutes left, please. Please.
Oh, so then I'll go for questions. We can go for questions.
No, please go ahead.
Okay,
Yeah, no,
yes.
very interesting.
Absolutely. So, another story that I have is I do what's called VAWA, a lot of VAWA, and that is Violence Against Women Act. That is a certain type of immigration. What it'll do is, if you are a victim of an immediate relative, generally it's a spouse, U.S. citizen, or a legal permanent resident, and you can file for what's called VAWA. And VAWA takes a while, but it can immediately get you to a green card, not immediately, but quickly get you to citizenship, not citizenship, I'm sorry, legal permanent residency, as well as it will not require you to have any sponsorship. And you can get work permits before that. And I had a client who I was helping. Actually, Pat helped me out with this case. But her husband brought her here on a K-1, which is a fiance visa. He didn't adjust her, and which means get her legal permanent residence. He divorced her after having 2 kids, so now she can't adjust on her K-1 visa. And then she abused her. CPS got involved because abuse happened in front of the kids. And then I represented her in the CPS case. Catholic Charities did her VAWA, and Pat helped testify as an expert witness about her immigration status. And so actually, I just found out this literally yesterday. Her VAWA is approved. They were literally just waiting for her legal permanent residency card. She ended up winning her CPS case. She has sole custody of her kids. And it actually overturned the horrific divorce decree that he had her sign because she speaks Portuguese and not English.
Wow, that's an amazing story. You know, as you're telling these stories, a lot of this comes down initially to the language barrier. And so a lot of local police departments don't have the language bank on contract, and they do struggle with language barriers. Do you have any suggestions, or can you point law enforcement officers to specific services that they can rely on to get translation services?
So I don't want to toot Asia's horn, but we have our own department for interpretation translation services. We, for example, are contract to help out with the some of the local human trafficking task force. We provide interpreters to those. So absolutely one thing you can do. There's something called language line, which a lot of the attorneys I hear, I'm sure, are familiar with, which is calling in. One thing I can say not to do is not to use, and I know this is hard and maybe limiting, but especially if there's a possibility of an intimate violence crime or intimate partner crime, not to use family members or kids or
Mhm.
community members even. I mean, they're like, okay, I'll take the Afghan community. I had a client who was Afghani. She um was a victim of intimate partner crime from another a man in the same community. She would not take, she spoke like, and these people are amazing, like 7 different other languages other than English. I'm not exaggerating on that number. But the main two that you normally hear associated with Afghanis is Urdu and Pashto, and I'm sure I butchered those. Um, but she would not have an interpreter who spoke Urdu or Pashto, period, and talk to me because
Mhm.
she didn't want to take the risk that they were from
Yeah.
that community. So she
Yeah.
actually spoke Hindi.
Mhm.
So we got a Indian Hindi interpreter, and she was fine.
Thank you. I know I'm cutting into our time, so I'm just gonna, since I'm running the show, I get to decide whether or not we do that. But I do have one last question. I think I know the answer, but just confirm for the audience, does Asian Services in Action help people outside of the Asian population?
That's a very fair question. It was a question I asked on my interview the first day, and
Okay.
absolutely. For example, I speak Spanish. I'm not Asian, so yes, absolutely. Anybody.
Thank you, Nate, so much, and thank you for your service to the community. We really appreciate it.
Thank you all for having me.
I'm very pleased to present our next speaker, Chief Prosecutor for the City of Cleveland, Aquila Jordan. Prosecutor Jordan leads the prosecution team in upholding justice and public safety. With a strong background in criminal law and public service, she is committed to fair and effective legal practices that protect the rights of all Cleveland residents. Aquila's leadership ensures the city's legal system operates with integrity, accountability, and with a focus on community well-being. Chief Jordan, thank you so much for joining us. Can we start off with speaking of importance of reporting and identifying situation of exploitation and trafficking and working with law enforcement,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. And
particularly for undocumented victims of crime?
yes, thank you so much for asking that question and thank you for having me here. I cannot stress how important it is for victims to work with our law enforcement partners. Whether or not you eventually prosecute the case isn't really what we're interested in for purposes of this conversation. Merely making the report alone opens avenues to victims to pursue U visas and T visas based on the police report alone. And so while we're not asking you, and as prosecutors, of course, we eventually would love for you to cooperate with prosecution, but making that report alone and having those conversations with our law enforcement partners allows for these avenues and processes to begin so that services can be put in place. And definitely, I know Nate just spoke, but I want to thank so much Asian Inc. because that is one of the top firms that we refer our victims here to make sure their rights are protected under Marcy's law.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So Prosecutor Jordan, can you tell us how can the local law enforcement agencies work with local organizations to support individuals that are maybe potential candidates or are in the process of applying for UNT visas?
So often our law enforcement agencies are so overwhelmed with what the crime itself is. And they aren't often focused on, well, what happens after I take this initial report? And so the main thing we need from our law enforcement partners is to make sure they're gathering all the information, right? You will never know what can be of value later on in this process. In order to help these victims and citizens as they seek the UNT visas. So if law enforcement can take the time to ask that one extra question, if you don't have language line, you can always come into the city prosecutor's office. We will assist CDP in utilizing language line to talk to victims if they don't have immediate access, or any of our partner agencies, because it is so important to have that neutral interpreter. And as Nate said, not utilize family members or community members, because oftentimes, a lot of cultures have this concept of what goes on in this house stays in this house. And we don't like to talk about that intimate partner violence or that relationship partner violence, especially in situations of trafficking. There's so much shame associated with that. And so the other thing I think it's super critical for law enforcement is use neutral language, right? We all have our own personal views, but when interacting with victims, those personal views can harm that relationship without you realizing it. It may cause a victim to shut down. So especially in our human trafficking and sex trafficking realm, there's so much internalized judgment there that initially we can turn the victim off. So just getting the information and having that judgment moment outside of your interactions with the victim so you can help them proceed on with their case.
Prosecutor Jordan, what are some other ways that we can continue to support the victims in our city?
Years ago, I went to a conference, and one of the concepts of the conference was this topic of start by believing, right? And it doesn't mean we eventually believe everything our victims say, but if we can begin conversations with, I hear you, I'd like to understand more, and truly enter the conversations with an open mind, that
I think we lost audio.
Did I lose audio?
You're back on.
Okay. Sorry, just
No,
spotty
it's
and
okay.
out. That allows people to really be heard and feel seen. And if we can just listen to their stories, right, and take down the information and take it in and report it back out as needed, that's the first thing that our victims really need to do to feel supported, right? And the second thing is, again, our language becomes so critical. You may be talking to your partner and think a victim may not hear something, but they may, or their family members may, right? And so we begin to enter a phase where our victims may lose trust in us. And so it's really important that we're intentional about continuing to restore trust with our community partners, with our community itself, right? And then I think the third most critical thing is be present in our community, right? We're so work-oriented as public service, and I know we work crazy hours, but sometimes it's nice, come back to that community festival outside your work hours, right? Come back to that block party so that our community starts to truly see us as partners, because we are present in the community as partners. That's another way to begin to bridge those gaps and divide. A victim may not cooperate the first time. In fact, we know with domestic violence, there are up to 7 times someone's abused before they even make a police report, right? So there have to be multiple different touches from multiple different agencies, and we all have to work collectively together.
Chief Jordan, I'm actually getting amazing questions, so I'm just gonna start reading them off because they are just phenomenal. So one question is, as a social service agency, what would be ways that we could encourage victims to contact law enforcement that might be afraid of coming forward?
I think one of the things, you can be honest with the victims always, right? And tell them, listen, if you file this police report, it is going to be the state or the prosecution's decision on whether or not to pick it up. But you will have the opportunity as a victim to speak on whether or not you'd like to proceed with charges. And so if you indicate that early on, right, say, I made this report, but I do want to tell you, I'm not sure I'm ready to proceed with charges yet. right? There's a statute of limitation. All charges don't have to go forward at the time you file them. For a felony, we have 6 years. For sexual assaults, I think it's somewhere between 20 and 25 years. There's time for you as a victim to make that decision, and then tell the victim as they file that police report, take an advocate with you, right? That shows as a victim, you're engaged in the process. You do want to file a police report, but you have someone else advocating for you standing right there in case you're not ready to engage with prosecution. But be honest with them and let them know it could still move forward, but you have a right to voice your opinion as well.
Thank you. Another question is, we have a follow-up clinic for historical and acute trauma. I'm not sure who we refers to, so let me just start again. We have a follow-up clinic for historical and acute trauma. I wonder if we can work with the population to seek medical care and working with others in the community.
I think there's always a way for medical providers to disseminate their information more about what services are available. So often our citizens are unaware of how many services are actually available to them. And so it's important that we as partner agencies pass this information along. So whoever has the acute and clinical historical trauma center, please reach out to us. We would love to pass that information on to citizens we interact with to say, here's another resource in the community. One of the things we have to continue to strive at in Cleveland is making sure we're all aware of the resources available.
And by the way, the question, the follow-up is it's Cleveland Clinic. So that was Cleveland Clinic. Thank you. And another question, I think, I'm not sure who is best to answer it, but I'll ask both you and Detective Durst. It's from a forensic nurse. He or she asks, how can we get patients to seek medical care after a sexual or physical sexual assault?
So that's a hard one. And that's where I think advocacy really can play a critical role. Medical exams and medical cares can, in some ways, be re-traumatizing, right? And especially to victims of sexual abuse. One of the things our SANE nurses are phenomenal with here in Greater Cleveland is asking our victims for consent every step of the way, right? So much power and control is taken away from our victims as a result of sexual abuse and physical abuse, but just asking, is it okay if this person is in the room? Do you need a moment before I move forward with this part of the procedure? Getting their consent every step of the way returns some of the power to them. And I think the way you continue to get victims to transform to survivors and engage in these medical needs that need to be treated are making sure, again, their voice is heard, and you're communicating with them throughout the proceedings. That's what allows them to be comfortable with you. That builds that sort of understanding that you truly are here to help, and that's what brings them back.
Thank you. So we have about a minute left, but I do want to ask this final question. When working with victims of human trafficking, prosecuting these cases can be especially difficult. The individual asking the question says that they have seen a lot of victims report to law enforcement, but the cases have been quickly dismissed. What is your advice to a victim in this situation who wants to pursue charges but is not getting a lot of helpful response from law enforcement?
Please don't give up on us. We as law enforcement and prosecutors sometimes are behind the learning curve with how we deal with our victims and seeing them as whole people, right? Keep coming back to us. Do not give up on us. Eventually you are going to stumble across that police officer or that prosecutor who is not going to give up on you. Right. So listen, if there are victims you want us to talk to, I have great team members here. I have a manager of citizen affairs who used to work with the Human Trafficking Task Force. Reach out to me offline and we can have a separate type of conversation. Right. But we are still learning as prosecutors and law enforcement. And there are so many bias and assumptions on human trafficking that we need to continue to educate ourselves. So please tell that victim, don't give up on us and reach out to me afterwards.
Thank you so much. This has been incredibly helpful. Last but not least, I am very pleased to present to you Detective Richard Durst. Detective Durst has been with the Cleveland Division of Police for 25 years. He has been assigned to the Sex Crimes and Child Abuse Unit for the last 15 years. Additionally, he serves on the Northeast Ohio Human Trafficking Task Force. He is committed to justice and public safety, and he specializes in complex investigations, ensuring thorough and fair case resolutions. Detective Durst's dedication to finding justice for victims and survivors plays a vital role in maintaining safety and upholding the law in both Cleveland and the surrounding communities. Detective Durst, thank you so much for your service. We are so honored to have you here. Can you share with us your perspective on the unique challenges for the law enforcement community in serving victims who are undocumented?
Yes, thank you for having me. Um, it's very challenging to reach out and make contact to keep them in the loop. I know that there is a lot of distrust with law enforcement, especially from some of the places that these folks are coming from. Our local law enforcement here in the United States is just local law enforcement. But for some folks, their local law enforcement is the state police or the national police. And so when they hear the words police, to them, it means something very different. So trying to build that trust and that relationship is sometimes very difficult.
Thank you, Detective. So what, in your opinion, should the law enforcement community be doing to support these victims?
I think having advocates, like Prosecutor Jordan stated, the advocates are really the grease behind the wheels. You know, it's not easy for people to trust the police, but I think it does help having advocates there who can help you, who can set them at ease, the advocate doesn't have not that the police, I would like to think the police don't have a threatening demeanor, but certainly an advocate has a different role than a police officer.
Understood. Detective, can you share a couple of stories of real cases to kind of put this experience in real life perspective?
Sure, sure. I had one investigation where it came through as a request from an advocate. The client was only Spanish speaking. So, through the use of an interpreter, I learned that this particular lady um, paid the coyotes down at the Mexican border to get her across, into the US. When she was with the coyotes, they told her, "This is where you're going to cross, and our other crew will pick you up on the other side." Well, when she gets to the American side, the crew there then sexually assaults her. She gets away from them. She moves on to somewhere in Texas, and then in Texas, she makes contact with Border Patrol, but she's too afraid to tell them, and eventually she's sent to Ohio. So through the advocate, I sat down with her. I did a report for her, and we determined the best location that she believed where she crossed into the US. And then I sent that report to that county in Texas. So she could then proceed with the advocate on to applying for her U visa. And my report would be used at some point when, when that time is there, to substantiate what she's saying.
Thank you for sharing that. And I presume that she was probably successful in obtaining U visa status, if you know.
I do not know. I do not
Okay.
know. That occurred, like Patrick talked about the time frame involved. This was less than a year ago.
Okay.
So she is still in that
She's
process.
still in the process. Gotcha.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for your colleagues in law enforcement? I know that there's, the subject of UNT visas probably doesn't come up very frequently in the law enforcement community. But what advice do you have for officers, whether they're uniformed officers or detectives, as they encounter somebody they suspect is a victim they suspect is undocumented?
To try and build a good rapport with them, again, the advocacy is so important. Um, they have to. I mean, some of the stories, that these people will tell you are very true, but they're very traumatic, and I think it's easy for people to dismiss. Um, so I think you have to give those folks the benefit and trust in their story and follow in their story. Um, I think I'd like to say that I want to believe that our local law enforcement agencies are up to speed with like handling these clients, um, but with working with the Northeast Ohio Human Trafficking Task Force, I hate to say I don't think they're probably all there yet. And so for anybody who does have clients or knows of people who do need that help, um, I don't have the number in front of me, but there is a number for the Sheriff's Department, for the Northeast Ohio Task Force. Um, it's a whole different level than calling like your local police department.
Understood. Um, this might be a shared question for the prosecutor's office or for you, detective. Um, does Cleveland Police or prosecutor's office have a victim advocate program that helps or speaks with victims of crime that might be about to encourage them to begin working or continue working with law enforcement?
So we do have a number of agencies we work with. We work with Harriet Tubman, which is out near Youngstown. We work with the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center, and the county prosecutor's office has advocates once a case would be charged and submitted. So we do have resources out there,
Okay.
um, and I think anybody like even the Asianing services. If Nate gave me a call one day and said, "Detective, we have this client," I mean, we'd be all in.
Understood. Detective, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. We were actually expecting another detective who is actively involved in investigating and signing these certifications. He got pulled away at the last minute, so I am going to fill that role. And just want to share some practical pointers for law enforcement agencies that are listening in for based on what we do here in the city. So the chief of police designates a point person here who reviews and determines eligibility for UNT visa certifications. All requests for these certifications are submitted to that one person. In our case, it's a lieutenant. The lieutenant then usually delegates this investigative work to a detective who reviews all the paperwork that's submitted, investigates the underlying facts, which could include pulling all of the police reports, speaking with the detectives who were involved in the case or uniformed officers, reviewing the investigative file where appropriate, speaking with the prosecutor, and determines independently whether or not the particular victim fits within the criteria outlined in the federal statute. So one of the questions that's actually asked, and I think I'm probably the person to answer that question, is there any possibility of law enforcement agency liability if the applicant is found to have fabricated the application and law enforcement signed off on it? So the law enforcement agency does not sign off on the application. It actually conducts its own independent investigation. And and it makes its own determination. So if there are other aspects of the visa application that are fabricated, that would have nothing to do with the law enforcement agency. And as an attorney who has litigated cases for the last 20 plus years, I can tell you, I do not see any realistic possibility of liability unless the law enforcement agency actively engaged in falsifying information. I hope that answers the question. So once the investigation is conducted and it's determined that the particular victim fits within the criteria of the federal statute, and in fact that there was the underlying crime, Then the lieutenant signs the certification. So it's important to note our detectives do not determine eligibility for the visa itself. And of course, our certifications are just that the crime fits the federal criteria and that the victim cooperated. The Department of Homeland Security makes the visa eligibility determination. Cleveland receives just about 100 or so of U visa petitions annually. Every request is evaluated individually based on the circumstances of the case. The division usually takes the request in paper form because it eliminates having to do additional work of printing out the forms. The vast majority, if not all of the requests, usually come from immigration attorneys. Virtually all of our certification requests involve U visas. We simply do not see T visa requests at our level, usually because they're prosecuted at the federal level. There are some excellent guides for law enforcement that are put out by the Department of Homeland Security. We're going to include those links in the materials that will be emailed to you at the end of the presentation, as well as other materials that we believe would be helpful to you. And with that, I am going to conclude our presentation and turn this over. I do not see, there's one more question. I think we'll answer it in writing because I am not sure that I can answer it right now. But I would like to turn this over to Joe for concluding remarks, unless there are any other questions.
Thank you so much, Elena, and thank you so much to Nate Johnson, to Akila Jordan, to Detective Durst, to Patrick Espinoza, and again to Elena Boop for providing an outstanding, powerful, informative 60 minutes of this. You heard from Prosecutor Jordan, you heard from Ms. Boop. I know both Patrick and Nate, if there are any questions, please feel free to reach out to them. You've got every one of these folks, whether they work for government or not, is a true public servant and wants to work with and for our law enforcement as they're doing a very difficult job that we have a lot of respect for. Global Cleveland is a nonprofit that has been here for 15 years, working to welcome, retain, attract, and integrate our international newcomers here in Northeast Ohio. We can't do this job without the incredible legal representatives that you see and without so many other organizations that help make this work possible. Thank you all for watching and attending. If you have any follow-up questions, my email is pretty straightforward, joe@globalcleveland.org. I'm more than happy to share that confidentially with any of our presenters. And I know the presenters are also able to be found as well in terms of their websites and the City of Cleveland public email. Thank you all for attending this very important session on victims of human trafficking. And we really appreciate everything that you're all doing. And we work very closely with each of you and look forward to strengthening our city by welcoming our world. This session is concluded. Thank you.
Thank you.